The story I'm about to tell you is not something I can easily admit, but it left me with profound thoughts about emotions, responsibility, and the thin line between right and wrong. Have you ever found yourself in a moment where everything you believed in suddenly felt uncertain? A moment where one heartbeat could change everything. My husband, Greg, had left early that morning for a weekend business trip to Los Angeles. We lived in a small house by the beach in California, with large windows that filled the space with sunlight and the soothing sound of crashing waves all day long. Greg loved his work, and I always supported him, even though his frequent trips left the house feeling emptier each time he was away. I decided to make use of the quiet morning by cleaning the house and refreshing the space. I put on my favorite jazz playlist and started in the living room. The music from the speakers played softly, creating a calm, airy atmosphere that blended perfectly with the fresh ocean breeze. I wore a simple white t-shirt and a pair of denim shorts to move around comfortably. As I focused on dusting the high bookshelves where Greg kept some of his favorite decorations, I suddenly had the distinct impression that someone was standing behind me. I turned around and saw Ryan, Greg's son from his previous marriage, leaning against the door frame. Ryan had just come out of his room, his hair messy and his eyes still carrying traces of sleep. "Good morning, Ryan." I greeted him with a smile, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "Morning," he replied, though his gaze stayed on me a little longer than usual. He stepped into the living room and sat down on the sofa, his eyes still following me. I tried not to pay too much attention and continued my work, but his presence made it harder for me to concentrate. We started making small talk about his internship plans and the projects he was working on. But when I reached up to adjust a picture frame on the top shelf, I didn't notice that I was unsteady on the small stool I was standing on. The stool wobbled slightly to one side, and I lost my balance. "Amelia!" Ryan shouted as he rushed toward me. He wrapped his arms around my waist just in time before I could fall. In the quiet room, I was steadied by Ryan's grip. We stood frozen for a few seconds, my breath caught in my chest as our eyes met, closer than ever before. I was aware of the firmness of Ryan's hold, but there was also a gentleness, as if he was afraid of startling me. My heart beat faster when I realized how close we were. I let out a small laugh to break the tense silence. "Good thing you were here. I could have had a nasty fall," I said lightly. Ryan didn't respond right away. His eyes stayed locked on me, as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the courage. His gaze was a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and something else, something like admiration. I stepped out of his hold and adjusted my t-shirt, trying to regain my composure. Ryan still stood there, his eyes not leaving me. I turned to him and spoke in what I hoped was a casual tone. "Do you have any plans for the weekend?" Ryan shrugged, a faint smile forming on his face. "Not really. I'll probably just stay home and relax." I nodded and walked over to the sofa, motioning for him to sit with me. I needed a minute to calm down after nearly falling. Ryan sat down, too, and suddenly, the space between us seemed smaller than it ever had before. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was quiet, but comfortable. The sound of the waves outside drifted in, accompanied by the golden sunlight streaming through the large window. I glanced at Ryan and noticed that he was still watching me with that calm, steady gaze. But there was something different in it, something soft, something sincere. "I've always loved mornings like this," I said gently, breaking the silence. "Peaceful and unhurried." Ryan nodded, his voice quieter.
"Me, too.
Especially when there's someone to share it with." His words made me pause. His tone didn't sound like he was talking about something simple. I felt my heartbeat quicken. "Amelia, sometimes it seems like we understand each other without needing words," he whispered, his eyes still locked onto mine. I was aware of the heat rising to my face. I shouldn't feel this way, but the way Ryan looked at me made everything seem hazy. Without thinking, I reached out and lightly touched his arm. That small gesture seemed to make the air between us freeze. There was nothing but our breathing and an awareness that was impossible to put into words. "Ryan," I murmured, unsure, but I couldn't look away. Ryan didn't say anything. Instead, he gently placed his hand over mine, holding it as if to reassure me. In that moment, I knew we were standing at the edge of something far bigger than just a fleeting closeness. But before I could think any further, he leaned in closer. I realized that I wasn't stepping back. Amid the morning sunlight and his nearness, it seemed as if the entire world outside had completely vanished. Ryan leaned in closer, and I couldn't stop myself from slowly leaning in as well. That moment stretched on forever as the distance between us disappeared. I closed my eyes, sensing that every sound around us had faded away. When our lips met, a tremor ran through my entire being. That moment wasn't rushed. It was gentle, as if we both knew we were crossing a final boundary, one we couldn't return from. My heart pounded in my chest like it wanted to break free. I knew this was wrong. I knew I shouldn't be doing this. But in that moment, my reason wasn't strong enough to resist the connection Ryan offered. I could perceive the strong and rapid beat of his heart. It matched mine completely. I reached up to his shoulder, aware of his form and his quickening breath as he whispered my name. Amelia. The sound of his voice made me shiver. I rested my head against him, aware of his arms wrapped securely yet tenderly around me, as if he wanted to shield me from everything outside of this world we'd created. I lightly brushed my fingers against his cheek. Ryan held me a little more closely, his eyes reflecting a sincerity and longing that was impossible to deny. We both knew the line had been crossed. There was no longer any defense between us. Ryan lowered his head, and our lips met again, this time more passionately. This moment made every wall I had built crumble. I ran my fingers through his hair, my hands trembling under the weight of emotions I could no longer hold back. Outside, the waves continued their rhythmic song, reminding me of the world that still existed. But in that moment, all that existed for me was his presence and a closeness that seemed as if we had belonged to each other for so long. I told myself to stop, but my heart wouldn't listen. I was aware of his nearness, his voice soft and trembling. I don't know what to do, Amelia. I can't stop thinking about you. I lightly touched his cheek, and in his gaze, I saw that we were both swept away in this unspoken, overwhelming emotion. That sweet temptation had pushed us past the fragile line, leaving me with a mixture of both fear and intensity, as if I had lost myself completely in his arms. I was almost lost in the haze between reality and overwhelming emotion. Every moment with him was gentle, yet burned like a slow fire I couldn't extinguish. My whole being trembled, not out of fear, but because of a desire so real and forbidden. I was lost in his eyes. The eyes of someone young, yet filled with yearning and sincerity that seemed almost cruel in its honesty. Amelia, his voice cracked, full of longing, but also pleading for me not to turn away. I didn't know what decision I made in that moment. Everything seemed like I was drifting down a rushing river with no way to fight it. My heart urged me to respond, heedless of the consequences. I closed my eyes again, aware of his nearness, the steady beat of his heart, making everything seem like a dream. Yet, deep in my mind, a faint voice whispered, "You've crossed the line." Even so, I couldn't stop myself. Ryan held me closer, his warmth wrapping around me like a protective blanket, making me forget the existence of everything else beyond this moment. "I never thought this could happen," Ryan whispered, his eyes glimmering with both uncertainty and joy. "Because I hadn't pushed him away. But I don't want to lose you, or this feeling." His words struck me deeply. I knew I should step back, but my hand still held his. Our breathing quickened, yet was strangely peaceful. Outside, the sound of the waves continued, an unending melody that made our moment seem even more separate from reality. I rested my head against his shoulder, aware of both safety and terror. Reality receded behind us like a curtain being pulled shut. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or awake. The boundary had faded away like a thin layer of mist. Then a sound broke the stillness. The front door opened, followed by a familiar voice echoing through the house. "Amelia, I'm home." I froze as if I had just woken from a long dream. Both Ryan and I started, as though pulled out of the safe bubble we had unconsciously created. My heart seemed to stop for a moment. Ryan quickly moved away from me, his eyes wide with panic, though they still carried something deeper, something neither of us dared to speak aloud. My heart pounded so hard I thought my whole being might shake apart. The air in the room seemed to vanish as Greg walked in, his face glowing with a cheerful smile, completely oblivious to the turmoil inside me. Amelia. His voice was warm and casual, the same way he always sounded when he returned home after a long business trip. I took a deep breath to calm myself, forcing my voice to sound steady. "I'm here," I called as I stepped out from the living room, trying to keep my smile as natural as possible, even though my hand still trembled slightly. Greg walked over, wrapping me in a hug, impressing a quick kiss to my forehead. "I missed you," he said, completely unaware of the tension that had gripped the house. I glanced over at Ryan. He was standing a few feet away in the living room, his hands stuffed into his pockets, as if to keep them from shaking. Our eyes met briefly, but it was enough for me to sense the turmoil in his heart. A mix of guilt and an unextinguished longing. "Ryan, is that you? Come over and say hi to your dad," Greg said cheerfully when he spotted him. Ryan took a long breath, steadied himself, and walked over with a forced smile. "Hey, Dad. How was your trip?" Greg beamed, patting Ryan's shoulder with pride. "It went great. Everything went smoothly. I even brought back a few gifts for you both." I felt a lump in my throat when I heard the word "Mom" come from Greg's mouth. It reminded me that I was caught between two worlds, one filled with Greg's peaceful love and another tangled in the forbidden emotions that Ryan and I had just stepped into. Greg turned to me, his face full of happiness as he talked about his meetings and funny stories from his trip, but his words only drifted past my ears. My mind was still trapped in that earlier moment when I had felt truly seen and desired in a way I never thought I would experience again. Ryan stood quietly behind Greg, his eyes still drawn to me as if trying to say something, but I avoided his gaze. I couldn't let Greg notice anything unusual. "I'll make us some coffee. You must be tired," Greg offered with a smile and headed toward the kitchen, oblivious to the heavy silence hanging in the room. As soon as the kitchen door closed behind him, I turned to Ryan. "We have to stop," I whispered, my voice shaking. Ryan took a step closer, his eyes filled with pain. "I know, but